Conversation with a Geographer. I'm Mike DeVivo, professor of geography at Grand Rapids Community College. And today, we're really fortunate to have Sarah Bednarz, professor emerita at Texas A&M University. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's wonderful you could join us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And as I start many of these interviews, I'll ask you to reflect upon your background stemming from your childhood in terms of what might have inspired you to pursue geography, and also who might have influenced you along the way in your schooling, in undergraduate studies, graduate studies, and elsewhere in the field. Would you care to comment for a few minutes?
Sure. Mike, thanks for doing this. It's a real service to the profession to have these kinds of recordings. And I didn't look at Bill Mosley's, which he posted on Facebook, because I wanted not to be prejudiced any way, shape, or form. But really, it is a wonderful thing that you're doing. So thank you for that.
Thank you for those kind words. And you're welcome, but thank you.
So when I was a child, my father worked for Mobil Oil. Mm-hmm. And I thought that mobile meant you moved a lot, because we did, in fact, move every 3, 4, 5 years. And so each time we moved to a different place, both here in the United States and overseas, and I'll talk a little bit about that, I just found myself naturally curious about what this new place was like, what were the physical differences, the environmental differences. And so I think as a child, I was kind of a natural geographer. And this was also encouraged by my father, who was kind of a Civil War buff. And his idea of vacation was bringing us to battlefields and walking us across the fields and looking at the various perspectives. And here were the Confederates and here were the Yankees. And so he was always very aware of the geography of places. And I think he instilled that in all of us. But when I was in 5th grade, we moved to the Philippines and lived there for a number of years. And then from the Philippines, we moved to New Zealand. Mm-hmm. And so I went in the Philippines to an American school. But in New Zealand, I went to a British-style girls' school, Chiltern St. James. And that's where I was first introduced to geography as a separate discipline, as a separate subject, because in the British system at that time, you had separate history and separate geography. Mm-hmm. And I had an absolutely brilliant geography teacher, Mrs. Dell. And we did field trips. We went out and collected samples. We learned about the geography of the UK. Which is kind of funny. Here you are in New Zealand, but you're memorizing how to draw the outline of the UK for an examination, a high-stakes examination. But that really did kind of give me the idea that geography was what interested me the most in all of the world at that time. Prior to that, I thought, ooh, archaeology, but no, it was geography. And then when we moved back to the United States, when it came time for me to look for colleges, I wanted to go to a college where I could take geography courses. And the place I decided upon was Mount Holyoke College, South Hadley, Massachusetts, which had a small but very nice geography department. And the two people there, Dr. Minnie Lemaire, who was a Clark graduate, a woman, and then Dr. Peter Angus, a Michigan graduate, were the two faculty members who ran the program with some people who came in and visited and all those kinds of things. And meanwhile, after I went to college, my freshman year in college, my parents then promptly moved again, abandoning me, to Tokyo. So every summer, and I at the time I thought, oh, I have to go home for the summer. But every summer I would go home to Tokyo and had wonderful adventures there. I taught English one year, I was a model. Another year, I ran a summer day camp for international kids. Another year. So I always had things that kind of brought together the places that I lived with some of my passion, which was for geography and helping other people learn about geography.
That's
so I think
great story.
Just having those international experiences and an innate curiosity led me into geography. But geography education came a little bit later, and that was because after I graduated from Mount Holyoke, I kind of had two pathways I thought about exploring. One was CIA, and I went through all the interviews and everything. And the other one was graduate school. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up going to graduate school at the University of Chicago. And my plan was I wanted to work with a geographer by the name of Norton Ginsberg, who was a specialist in Southeast Asian development educational policy.
He later went to the East-West Center in Hawaii for a while.
Exactly, and Santa Barbara. And so I got to the University of Chicago as a master's student, and the first thing I found out was, Professor Ginsberg's not coming back this year. He's going to stay an extra year at, I don't know, wherever he was, Santa Barbara, I think it was. So it's like, plan B. What am I going to do now for my master's? And the wonderful Bill Pattison, William F. Pattison at the University of Chicago said, well, what excites you? And I said, well, actually, geography excites me. I really love geography. I think it's so important. I think everybody should know more about geography. And he said, well, did you ever think about teaching? I hadn't really thought about it, but he got me interested. And so I switched from the MA program to the Masters of Art in Teaching program at the University of Chicago. And so Bill Pattison was my mentor. And so I did wonderful courses in geography, and then also took some courses in education from, really outstanding people. It wasn't your basic teacher preparation program. It was really kind of an extraordinary experience. And then I did my student teaching at the lab school at the University of Chicago. And that was kind of also because of outside influences. I was going to do it with the wonderful educator, the master geography educator, Jim Marin at New Trier High School in Wilmette, Illinois. Perfect place to do it. However, it was 1973, and the oil crisis hit, 73, 74, and so I couldn't really get enough gasoline to get me up to Wilmette to do my student teaching, but I could walk 2 blocks to go to the lab school and do my student teaching. And there I was lucky enough to have a class, one of the classes that I taught previously that semester or previously that year had been taught by Bob Bednarz, who was one of my fellow grad students at the University of Chicago. He whipped these kids into shape for me, and he taught them economic geography so that when I had to come in and talk to them about, these were 7th and 8th graders, they already had a deep understanding of concepts like weight gaining and weight losing, site location. Thank you, Bob Bednarz. So it was really fun. So that's how I got into geography education per se, kind of fell into it, but then it was perfect. It was perfect.
That's wonderful. Let me interrupt you just for a second here, because Pattison was known for being really one of the rare geography educators of his time with regard to this article concerning the traditions in geography that still may be used, but many of our viewers and listeners might not be aware that this piece of scholarship was really read and reread throughout many graduate seminars in geography, probably for a few decades.
The 4 traditions of geography. Yeah, very useful, simple way of trying to understand what it is that geographers actually do in a way. So yeah, very valuable piece. And he was just a very nice, very thoughtful person, kind of a silly person. And there, at the University of Chicago, we're talking high-powered people. We had, Brian Barry and Carl Butzer and Stephen Gallant and Chauncey Harris and all sorts of other people. And then you had nice Bill Pattison, who would actually talk to people and be very gracious, and it's kind of so. That's
interesting. So from Chicago. Did you teach in the public schools in the vicinity?
No. No, I did not teach in the public schools in Chicago. I got married to Bob Bednarz. And
isn't that a surprise?
I know. And his first teaching position was at Northwestern. So we kind of moved from the south side of Chicago to the north side, to Evanston, Illinois. And for a while, I did substitute teaching in various places, mainly at the lab school at the University of Chicago. I tried to get into the Chicago public schools, but I didn't know anybody. And at the time, you had to know somebody to get a job in the Chicago public schools. I remember going in for the interview, and they said you had to, one of the things was, do you have a recommendation? And I said, well, what do you mean? I have, academic recommendations. Well, no, like your alderman, it was a political system. So I did not get into that. And I ended up teaching at a wonderful, small parochial school in Evanston, Illinois, St. Mary's. And I taught 7th and 8th grade social studies, and 6th grade something else. I forgot. It's all social studies, and a little bit of catechism. I'm not Catholic, but it was a wonderful little school. We called it St. Mary's of the Last Resort, because we got a lot of kids who'd been bounced from the public schools into St. Mary's. But it was a great community of educators really working together for the benefit of the kids. So I did that for 3 years, and then we moved to Texas. And so then I continued to teach. I taught high school in a small rural town called Hearne, Texas, for 2 years. And then I taught middle school again in College Station, and then finally at College Station, A&M Consolidated High School. I taught there for 7 more years. So I was a middle school and high school teacher until 1988. And I loved it. I loved working with students. I loved my colleagues. It's when you're teaching in a school like that, you really are centered on helping students, helping kids learn. And that was, I thought, a wonderful place and thing to do. But at the same time, and stop me if you've got, I can just go on forever, but at the same time, I was really curious about how it is that students learn to think geographically. So, I mean, some kids, they just got it like that. And map reading was not an issue. And other kids were had to be helped and assisted and scaffolded up into gaining the kinds of skills that you want kids to have in terms of learning geography or social studies or history or whatever the subject was. And so because of another colleague at Texas A&M, James B. Crocht, Crocht said, Sarah, with this curiosity, why don't you come back and do a degree at a PhD? And I said, well, I'm a geographer. I want to be a geographer. He said, well, you can do geography education. And I thought, well, because that was his area of specialty. And so that is what I did. I started going back, taking classes starting in 1985. Then at the time at Texas A&M, in the College of Education, they had a 1-year requirement. You had to be in residence, which was pretty typical for PhD programs at the time.
Sure.
So I took a leave of absence from A&M Consolidated, swearing I would be back. And did my year at A&M, and taking courses full time. I taught in the curriculum program for a period of time. But then geography said, "Can you teach Intro to Human Geography for us?" And I said, yeah, yeah, sure, I can do that. I'd love to do that. And so I started teaching for the department. At the end of my year of residency, I went like in April to go back and to remind the school board and everybody else that, I'd said it's a 1-year leave of absence, I'm coming back. And the principal during that time had changed, and the new principal didn't know me, or knew me and didn't want me back again. I don't know, but whatever. The offer was I was going to be a floating teacher, no classroom, 3 preparations, and none of them geography. And so I said, I think I'm going to stay at the university. And so I cobbled together like lecture, I was a visiting assistant professor, I was this, I was that, and just ended up staying at Texas A&M in the Department of Geography, and finally getting on a tenure track position, and then getting tenure, and then getting promoted. So.
Well, it's really interesting. You had a lot going on in your life. You were doing so many things, and you were really active in the AAG and the NCGE, even in the 80s. And I was talking to Bob earlier, I mentioned that the first time I met you was in a geographic education session where I delivered a paper, and Elaine Bozowski was the chair of the session, and geography education was really still in its youth. It was at a time when the geographic alliances had just been mentioned. The high school geography project was over, and the heroes, I guess, of the movement were not that numerous. And I mean, Salvatore Natoli was one,
Damn.
Yep. Great man,
Wonderful.
great architect of geography education in many ways, and later Phil Gershmel became very important, and you and Bob were also very important. And there are others in the States, but the geographic alliances that I guess were initially engineered by Kit Salter in terms of theory, in terms of California, and then with the National Geographical Society and AAG, really took off in some places, and in some places it didn't. Do you have any idea what happened with regard to that? Because in some places there were success stories, in some places there weren't.
Yeah. I was lucky because Jim Croft, working with Dick Bain at Texas State, were 2 very important geography educators. They were part of the group that wrote the 5 themes of geography, the guidelines for geographic education. And so they were kind of at the ground floor with Kit of starting this National Alliance movement. And so I was luckily, I walked into Jim's office one day and he said, how would you like to go to the National Geographic Society for the summer? This was 1986. And I said, do I have to appear topless in the magazine? I'll do it, whatever. And so I was part of the first group of teachers who went as the core alliance. It was Oregon, Tennessee, Texas, California, Colorado, I'm missing New Jersey. And I think there was one other state. Anyway, so we for a month, we were in D.C. with Kit and Kathy Salter and a really great group of educators from these various states. They were enthusiastic, but they didn't know geography. And I was one of the few people, and there were 35 of us, I think, who actually had a background in geography. So I was both enthusiastic and a little wary of the direction things were going, thinking that if we're not careful, if we don't keep this to the core of good geography, what is good geography, we're going to get pulled in all sorts of directions. The alliances, the model became then from 7 to 14 to, until we have everybody in the universe in an alliance. And some of these alliances were successful because they had core leaders who knew how to work with teachers. And that was the beauty of the Alliance movement. It was teachers learning from geography professors learning from teachers. In the states where you didn't have that kind of leadership, either on the part of the teachers or the part of the university faculty, it never took off. Like New Jersey. New Jersey had wonderful teachers. They had a great couple of geographers, but they just never meshed. It just never went anywhere. And so I think that, and then in California, just simply because of the size, I mean, they eventually had like Northern California and Southern California as two separate. But in states where you had some kind of political influence, I think we pulled our weight in Texas pretty darn well. And Illinois is another example of a place with a lot of enthusiasm that they were able to make a difference. Mm-hmm. That's where you had success. In the states where you didn't have that, they just never went anywhere.
Well,
so it was a function of leadership, I think, as much as anything.
I think this is important for us to discuss because we don't have geography in the public schools in most places, and where it is, it's often inadequate still. And our discipline's in a precarious position, and we should acknowledge that this might be one of the deficiencies that we have, is its absence in that K through 12 landscape.
But I will, yes, it is largely absent. However, I would say the Advanced Placement in Human Geography program, College Board, AP courses are very powerful. There are, I think this year they said there's more than 240,000 students took the exam, which was yesterday or 2 days ago. That's a win for geography.
Well, as are those students that are dual enrolled in many community college geography courses. That's a big win for us as well.
I am sure that it is. Coming to community college, yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Any kind of, I mean, and that's where you're going to see real growth, I think. To get time, I mean, nationwide, we're having real difficulties in terms of setting up policies for anything educationally. And I think this is something that AAG could actually jump in and do more in terms of educating people about how do you change policies. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very important. And so I would like to see us kind of take some time to look at, geography has always been in a precarious position. We've had some successes. The alliances were a success, but it's a cyclical kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's time for us to push back. I don't think we're actually going to get the kinds of, we're not going to get, you know, a mandated geography course. We're not going to do, you know, all of these kinds of things, but there are incremental things we can do as geographers to help improve the quality of geography education in the schools.
I hope so, and like you, I agree that we need to be influential in decision making with regard to these things, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level, or certainly at local levels too.
Right.
But we've digressed a bit to this, and I guess I should get back to talking about you. So you're at Texas A&M. You've gotten tenure in the Department of Geography. You're teaching courses. Would you care to comment on some of your research associated with what you're engaged in and any students you might have that you're advising?
Well, so I was always interested in how people learn. So that's kind of basic cognitive processes, why some people are challenged and why some people are not. So that was kind of what I was interested in. But I was also interested in, I had the wonderful opportunity to be part of the group of people who wrote the National Geography Standards. Mm-hmm. So I was working with like Bob Morrill and Roger Downs and Norm Bettis and Kit Salter and Jim Marin, and it was just an amazing experience to do that. It was a political learning experience, but it was just a wonderful experience. But so I became interested in kind of the implementation. What do you need to do to implement educational reforms? So that was part of what I was interested in terms of research. So talking to teachers, talking to policymakers about how do we implement this? How do teachers perceive these changes? How can we communicate change in a way that makes it easier for them to comprehend and act on? At the same time, I got kind of into the whole idea of geographic information systems and geospatial technologies, working with Gail Ludwig, who was at National Geographic at the time, introducing the idea of simple GIS as part of geographic teaching and learning. And so that led me to spatial thinking. And I had a wonderful set of students at A&M. John Wan Lee was Bob's student, In-Jung Jo from was my student, Min Sung Kim. We had this wonderful connection. Another Kirk Oda, Japanese and Korean students, American students, Gillian Atchison, a number of others. And we all got interested in how do we help students to think geographically and think spatially with and without geospatial technologies. And so that's kind of where the focus of a lot of the work that we did there was on. And we had a fun project sponsored or funded by the National Science Foundation called AGS. And I'm not going to think what the acronym was, but it was like something to do with spatial thinking in science and social studies. And so that was an opportunity to go back out into the schools, again, for me and grad students, and try to encourage teachers or help teachers to understand what is spatial thinking in science and social studies. How do you encourage students to think spatially? Is it just through technology, or are there other things that we can do? And so that whole area of spatial thinking became very important in my research. And it was a lot of fun, too. I mean, I remember working with the science teachers, and they were doing frog dissection. And I said, you aren't using language in a way that helps students to see where these things are in the frog. And so we did a kind of a simple experiment. We had one teacher who used a lot of very spatially explicit language, talking about, the kidney is below, is above, is to the left of, to the right of, is adjacent to, all these kinds of spatially aware words. And then the other teacher didn't. And the kids who had all of this explicit spatial language about the location of the various organs in the frogs that they were dissecting did much better on the final test than the kids who didn't have that vocabulary to help them to think about where the things were in the frog.
Gaining that sense of being able to develop locational relationships is an imperative, and yes, it can be lost,
right?
Like putting pieces of a puzzle together.
And so we discovered explicit use of spatial language helps students to think geographically and spatially. And we even developed like little flip books. Are you familiar with flip books? It's something teachers have used for a long time. And it was basically spatial vocabulary. And if you explicitly teach kids how to describe something using specific language, it empowers them to have a better understanding of where things are in the world, and it makes them better at communicating geographic concepts and ideas. So that was that was a lot of fun, the AGS project. But so the research was spatial thinking and geographic thinking, and how to encourage people to do those things. So.
It's really interesting. But let's turn now to your work with the AAG.
Okay.
Would you care? You've done so much. Would you care to comment on its evolution, perhaps in say 5 minutes?
I attended my first AAG in 1971 as an undergraduate at Mount Holyoke. It was in Boston.
Wow.
And my boyfriend at the time lived in Boston. So I just went and hung out with him and went to the AAG. And it was the Boston Marathon at the same time. So it was a lot of fun. And then later, I tried to go to the AAG every year when I was a teacher. The only year I skipped from like 74 till 1985, I was the senior class sponsor in 85. So Bob had to go to Minneapolis by himself, and I had to stay home and do the prom, which was a nightmare. And, okay. So I loved as a teacher going to AAG because it filled me with ideas, and I got to see new books and hear new ideas. And then I am just kind of a volunteer, so I got involved in SWAG, Southwest Association of Geographers, because A&M would have, periodically we'd all take turns having the SWAG meetings. Got excuse me, involved in that. So I got elected national counselor, had a wonderful experience, and then later was nominated again to run for president. And I was a little surprised that I actually won, but it's a story. I ran against Craig Colton, who was a friend of mine, who taught at LSU. And we happened to run into each other at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport one day. He was going somewhere, I was going somewhere. And we sat down for like an hour, and I said, Craig, you're a dear friend of mine. I don't want to do anything that's it's a fair competition. But we said, we're not going to campaign. We're not going to ask people to vote for us or not vote for us. We're not going to do that. So we called it the DFW Accords. And we let everybody know that, we were supportive of each other. And I ended up winning. But and it was a learning experience for me. I love council. I love the AAG. We had some challenges with leadership at AAG at the time. And so it was also a wonderful experience to work closely with Julie Winkler from Michigan State, Mona Dimash from Dartmouth, and then I was the next president. And then following me was Glenn McDonald, a wonderful man, and then Derek Alderman, another fabulous person. So I had this whole continuity of opportunities to work with some of the best people ever.
And the staff. Dedicated people, too.
Totally. And very different, all very different, but all, it was just so, it was a positive experience for me in terms of honing my leadership skills and frustrations and things like that. But I was also, by then, Associate Dean of the College of Geosciences at A&M, so I stepped away from full-time teaching. I still taught one course, but so I was doing a lot more administrative work. And you talk about the trials and tribulations of leadership. So it was, AAG was like an outlet for me.
What did you seek to emphasize as president of the AAG?
Oh, I definitely wanted geography education, promoting advanced placement in human geography as a way to move forward, asking departments to be sure that they actually work closely with their colleagues in high school classrooms and community colleges. And it's like, of course, we're all part of the same small community. We cannot be bifurcating. Another initiative was the Fellows program, AAG Fellows. So that was suggested to me as something that, well, why AGU has a Fellows program? Why doesn't AAG? And I said, yeah, why not? So I kind of pushed that through. It has morphed and changed a little bit now, but that was, so it was basically geography education and honoring outstanding geographers who deserve to be honored for a variety of things, not just scholarship, but for outreach, for work with the communities, whatever. It's a broad tent to be a fellow. So
well, and you've served on the Healthy Departments Committee as well. Do you have any suggestions for departments that should probably consider advancing geography in different ways before an ultimatum is facing them?
I think it was Ron Abler who wrote a column years and years ago. And basically his message was, don't ever go to the dean if you're having problems inside your department. And it's all intuitive stuff. You have we're dealing with human beings, with people, and it's important for the department leaders to have people skills. You don't pick a department head because of his or her scholarship, I think. You have to pick a department head who's going to be equitable and transparent and care about his or her colleagues. So it's kind of basically human relations that's an important part of departmental success.
No, responsible leadership tasks one to be proficient in relationship building.
Absolutely. Be a human being, and just care about the students, care about your colleagues, care about the staff who facilitate you, all those kinds of things. But the Healthy Departments was a really, I found that a very valuable experience because it did give me the opportunity to go to the Geography Faculty Development Academy, GFDA. Ken Foote, bless his heart, invited me to go to the very first one in Boulder in 2001 and be part of that group, basically teaching young faculty how to be better teachers. How do you command a whole room of 180, or I think the largest class I ever taught was 360. It was a zoo, but
that's a big class.
But working with faculty, young faculty, experienced faculty, that to me was the best part of it. I loved doing GFDA, and then the Leadership Academy. Derek Alderman and I did that for 2 years at Tennessee as the directors, following Ken teaching us what to do at UConn for the 2 previous years. So to me, that's the kind of program that AAG, I always said, should be doing more of. And thank God now under Gary and the current board, National Council, they're doing these kinds of really important faculty development kind of initiatives, which I think is what a professional association should be doing.
Indeed. We have just a minute to go here, Sarah. I'm going to ask you to reflect on your career and maybe offer some words of advice beyond what you've related to colleagues or graduate students or undergraduate students interested in pursuing geography. Any comments?
It's a passion. You either want to do it or you don't want to do it. And in my entire life, I've been driven by an enthusiasm for the discipline of geography. You just have to do what you want to do and do it your way. And don't let anybody try to stop you from doing things. I have nothing more to say.
Absolutely. It's a passion. It's a passion. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a privilege and it's been a wonderful, wonderful talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And this concludes this episode of Conversation with a Geographer. Thank you all.